I was 27 when my parents decided to ruin my life. I wish I could say that came out of nowhere, that it was some wild twist in an otherwise normal family dynamic. But the truth is, the signs were always there. You don't just wake up one morning and sabotage your own kid's life unless something's been broken for a long time. My name's Bradley, and I grew up in a house where success wasn't something to be celebrated. It was something to be resented, especially if it wasn't theirs. My dad, Mark, was the kind of guy who measured manhood by how loudly you could shout someone down in an argument. He was a high school football star who never made it past his hometown, and he wore that like a badge of honor, like the world had cheated him out of something. My mom, Karen, yes, unfortunately, that's actually her name, played the loyal wife role to the point of absurdity. She acted like my dad's word was gospel, even when he was spewing nonsense. They were the kind of parents who believed respect was owed, not earned. And if you ever dared to question their authority, well, let's just say you were getting too big for your britches. Growing up, I learned early that praise was a scarce currency in our house. You didn't get a good job for bringing home straight A's. You got a reminder that plenty of kids do that, and a question about why I hadn't taken on more extracurriculars. When I landed my first job in high school working weekends at a local hardware store, I used to be proud walking in the front door with my little envelope of cash. My dad would barely look up from the TV. "Hope you didn't screw up the register again," he'd mutter, half joking, half not. And if my younger brother Jason, 4 years younger, lazier, and with a magical talent for avoiding responsibility, got a C on a math test, they'd take him out for ice cream because he tried his best. Still, I wasn't a victim. I worked hard, I kept my head down, and I used every inch of distance I could create to build a life outside their shadow. I went to college on scholarship, no help from them, and graduated with honors in business administration. By the time I was 25, I'd landed a management job at a mid-sized logistics company. Nothing flashy, but the pay was solid, the team respected me, and I had a corner office with a window that overlooked the river. I even got to fly out for conferences a few times a year. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something of my own, something they couldn't touch. Of course, I made the mistake of telling them. It started with small things, as it always does. My mom would call me and make snide little comments like, "Must be nice to sit in an office all day while real people do the hard work." Or she'd ask if I was dating anyone, or are the women up there too high maintenance for you now? My dad, meanwhile, would scoff at everything I told him. When I mentioned I got a small bonus for leading a new project, he said, "You should be giving that to us. We raised you, after all." It was like any success I had was an insult to them, a reminder that I'd left them behind. But the real turning point came when Jason, remember him, crashed his car into a pole while driving under the influence. My parents didn't punish him. They didn't even seem mad. They were just upset that the insurance wouldn't cover the full damage. So they called me. "Bradley," my mom said sweetly, "your brother's in a tough spot. You know he's still trying to find his footing, and we just thought, since you're doing so well, maybe you could spot him a few thousand, just to help him get another car." "No," I said flatly. "I'm not paying for his screw-up." There was a long pause. Then my dad got on the phone. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Sitting up in your glass tower? You wouldn't have any of that without us." I could have hung up. I probably should have. But I didn't. I was tired. Tired of pretending we were a normal family. Tired of biting my tongue every time they tried to drag me back down. "You didn't help me get any of this," I told him. "You've done nothing but belittle me since I was a kid. So no, I'm not giving you money. And if this is how these conversations are going to go, maybe we shouldn't have them anymore." I hung up, and for a while, it was quiet. A month passed, then two. No calls, no texts, no random guilt-tripping voicemails from my mom. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd gotten the message. That maybe we could finally start over as distant relatives who politely wished each other happy birthdays and kept the conversation shallow. But that would have been too easy. The next time I heard from them wasn't a phone call. It was a meeting with my boss. He called me into his office, his expression unreadable. I remember the way he folded his hands on the desk and said, "Bradley, I received a very disturbing phone call this morning." My stomach dropped. "Someone claiming to be your father said they had evidence you've been stealing money from the company." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It sounded so ridiculous. "Wait, what?" His face didn't change. "He claimed you'd been funneling client payments into a personal account and that he had bank statements to prove it." Obviously, we take allegations like this seriously, so I reviewed everything myself. I didn't find anything yet, but before I could even respond, your mother called too. She said you'd confessed to her in tears and begged her not to tell anyone. My mouth went dry. Sir, that's completely false. I would never. I want to believe you, he said quietly. But the board has been alerted. There's going to be an audit. In the meantime, we have to suspend you. Effective immediately. I didn't even hear the rest. It was like white noise washed over everything. I stood up. I nodded, numb, and walked out of that building in a daze, my ID badge still dangling from my neck like a joke. My coworkers stared at me as I passed. Some gave me sympathetic looks. Others avoided my gaze. I sat in my car for an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, replaying every interaction I'd ever had with my parents, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. And then I called them. My mom answered on the second ring, her voice sugary sweet. Bradley, how are you? You called my job, I said. You told them I was stealing money. Are you out of your mind? There was a pause. Then, in the background, I heard my dad say, put him on speaker. She did. Bradley, my dad said, we were just trying to help. You've been so full of yourself lately. Someone needed to bring you back down to earth. I blinked. You ruined my career. You think this is some kind of lesson? You'll bounce back, he said. But maybe next time, you'll remember where you came from. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. And that's when it hit me. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to take it back. They thought they were right. And that's when I decided they were never going to see what was coming next. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything crushing down on my chest like a concrete slab. Every hour or so, I'd reach for my phone hoping to see an email from my boss, maybe an apology saying it was all a misunderstanding and that I could come back. But nothing. Just silence. Silence from work. Silence from the so-called friends I'd made there. And the loudest silence of all, from the people who had detonated my entire life and went to bed that night without a second thought. For the first week, I kept hoping it would blow over. That HR would realize the allegations were baseless. That someone, anyone, would take my side. But the truth was, when someone accuses you of something that's serious, especially when it comes from your own parents, it sticks. My work email was locked. My company card frozen. The few colleagues I texted gave me dry responses or ghosted me altogether. I could feel the walls closing in. That weekend, I got a call from Jason. I stared at his name flashing across the screen for a good 10 seconds before answering. We hadn't spoken since I'd refused to pay for his DUI wreck. He was the golden boy, the favorite, the one who could burn down the house and somehow still be handed a trophy. Brad, he said, casual as ever. Man, you okay? Mom told me you were having a rough week. Rough week? Like I caught the flu or something. You mean the part where they lied to my boss and got me suspended? I asked flatly. He whistled. Yeah, that was messed up. But, they were just trying to help. I almost laughed. Help? Look, man, he said, shifting into that familiar tone of fake empathy he always used when he wanted something. Dad said you've been acting like you're better than everyone. I'm not saying they were right, but you have been kind of distant. You don't come home anymore. You don't call unless they call first. I think they just felt like you were slipping away. I was slipping away, I snapped. Because every time I come around, it turns into a guilt trip or a lecture. I'm not going to keep subjecting myself to that just because they're family. There was a pause. Then Jason, still soft-spoken, said something that made my skin crawl. If you just gave them what they were asking for, this probably wouldn't have happened. I didn't even respond. I just hung up. And that was when I realized this wasn't just about the phone call. This was about control. About a family so threatened by my independence that they had to destroy it to feel powerful again. I wasn't their son. I was their success story, and if I stopped playing along, they'd rather see me ruined than proud. The audit at work dragged on. I was put on unpaid leave while the board sorted through every expense report, every client invoice, every travel receipt I'd filed over the past 2 years. It didn't matter that I had nothing to hide. The accusation alone was enough to blacken my name. I couldn't even walk into a coffee shop without wondering if someone had heard about that manager who embezzled funds and got caught. My landlord was sympathetic for the first month. But by the second, I was dipping into savings to keep the lights on. And by the third, I was selling my PS5, my spare monitor, even the expensive watch I'd gotten as a promotion gift. I was hemorrhaging. I applied for jobs, dozens of them, but references were impossible. The HR department at my old job wouldn't give a clear answer to recruiters, just that I was under review and not currently employed. In the business world, that's code for don't touch this guy. By month 4, I was driving Uber at night just to cover groceries. And then came the wedding invitation. No, not mine. Jason's. I got it in the mail like a slap to the face. A glossy card with golden trim, all frills and fake smiles. You are cordially invited to the union of Jason Miller and Danielle Roberts. The envelope had a handwritten note from my mom. We hope you'll come. It would mean a lot to the family. I stared at it for 10 minutes before dropping it in the trash. The irony was almost poetic. Jason, who still lived at home, who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, who blamed everyone else when things went wrong. He was moving forward, getting married, celebrated. And I was a pariah, the black sheep, the accused. But here's the part that really broke me. 3 days later, I got a voicemail from my mom. "Bradley," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We were thinking it might be best if you didn't come to the wedding, just to keep the peace. You understand, right? Jason's boss will be there, and we don't want any awkwardness." I didn't throw my phone, though I wanted to. I sat there in the dark, my hands shaking, listening to that message over and over. We don't want any awkwardness. Like I was the one causing problems. Like I was radioactive, uninvited from my own brother's wedding because I was inconvenient to look at. That was the moment something snapped in me. This wasn't just emotional neglect anymore. This was character assassination. A slow, calculated unraveling of my life from people who were supposed to love me. And still, I didn't retaliate. Not yet. Instead, I started documenting. Every text, every voicemail, every bank statement. I gathered everything. Proof of my clean work history, emails from clients praising my leadership, performance reviews. I submitted an official written statement to HR, complete with timelines and attached files. I wrote out what had happened with cold, surgical detail, who called, what was said, and when. I knew it wouldn't erase the stain, but I had to fight it, even if no one ever read it. But even then, they weren't done. I found out from an old coworker that my parents had come in person to my former office building. They showed up during a lunch hour, handed a folder to the front desk, and asked if they could speak with someone in management. Inside the folder were edited bank statements. Fabricated, forged, documents that made it look like I had transferred funds to a personal account. Thankfully, the company had already begun verifying everything with accounting and saw the discrepancies. But the intent was clear. They were trying to destroy me. It wasn't about humility. It was about power. I finally reached out to a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in defamation and workplace retaliation. I met him in a dingy downtown office, wearing a button-down shirt I'd ironed 3 times to make it look presentable. I was exhausted, broken, and borderline out of money. But I had one thing left. Rage. "You have a case," he told me after listening to everything. A strong one. And suddenly, for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control return. But before I could even file the suit, there was one more betrayal waiting for me. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was home, jobless and halfway through a bowl of instant noodles, when there was a knock on the door. I opened it to find a man in a crisp suit holding a manila envelope. "You've been served," he said, then walked off. I opened it. Inside, a letter from my parents. They were suing me for emotional distress, claiming I had threatened and harassed them and publicly defamed their character in retaliation for a misunderstanding. It was unreal. They accused me of hurting them after what they did to me. And that was the moment. That was the exact second I knew this wasn't just going to end with cutting contact or moving on. This wasn't going to be a clean break or a sad story I told my therapist years from now. No, this was going to be war, and I was going to win. I didn't answer calls for the next 3 days. Not from my lawyer, not from Jason, not even from my old coworker Brian, who'd left me a sympathetic voicemail saying, "I don't know what's going on, man, but I believe you." I couldn't even bring myself to respond. I was too far gone. I stared at that lawsuit from my parents like it was some kind of cosmic joke. Emotional distress? Public defamation? They'd tried to erase my career, driven me into financial ruin, forged documents to frame me. And now they were playing the victims? What made it worse, what made it unbearable, was the tone of the letter. Clinical. Cold. Like they were suing a stranger. Like I was just a name on a docket. I wish I could tell you I responded with strength, that I pulled myself together, called my lawyer, and marched straight into battle. But that wouldn't be the truth. The truth is, I spiraled. There's no romantic way to describe what rock bottom feels like. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like a guy in sweatpants eating ramen off a paper plate at 2 a.m. while reruns of some show he's not even watching drone in the background. Sometimes, it's a silent panic attack that lasts for hours. Sometimes, it's just nothing. You don't cry. You don't rage. You just exist in a hollow kind of numbness. I canceled my gym membership. I stopped answering texts. I stopped shaving. For the first time in my adult life, I had no purpose, no direction, no schedule. I was a ghost in my own apartment. And then the eviction notice came. I was behind on rent by 2 months. My savings were gone. Uber income barely covered groceries. I had exactly 13 days to vacate. That night, I sat on the floor with my back against the fridge, holding the eviction letter in one hand and my phone in the other. I almost called them. Almost. Part of me, some pathetic little fragment, still believed they might feel bad, that they might take it back, that this was all some elaborate test, and if I just gave in, they'd welcome me back like nothing happened. But I didn't call. Instead, I called the only other number I had left. Kira. She was an ex. We dated in college. She was the first person who really saw me, the first person who told me I could be more than the people who raised me. We broke up because life took us in different directions, but we stayed on friendly terms. She lived about an hour away, and I knew she had a guest room. I didn't expect her to say yes. Honestly, I expected her to hang up after I explained what had happened. But she didn't. She listened. Every word. And when I finally ran out of things to say, she just asked one question. Do you want to sleep on the couch or the guest bed? I broke down. That weekend, I packed everything I could fit into 2 suitcases and a couple of trash bags. I left the rest. My lease was up in a week anyway, and there wasn't anything left to hold on to. I took one last look at that apartment, my first place on my own, the place I'd celebrated promotions, hosted game nights, built a life, and walked away. Kira welcomed me in without fanfare. No pity, no judgment. Just a quiet house, a clean bed, and a little folded towel on the nightstand. She didn't ask me to explain anything again. She just let me breathe. The first week, I barely left the room. I slept. I read. I stared at the ceiling. Kira would knock sometimes, leave tea or snacks by the door, but never pushed. Slowly, I started to come out of the fog. I started going for walks. I helped with dishes. I offered to mow her lawn, which turned into a weekly routine. And one day, she walked into the kitchen and found me sketching something on a napkin. What's that? She asked. I didn't even look up. Business plan. She sat down across from me. You starting a company? Thinking about it, I said. Something small. Consulting. I still know the industry. I still have contacts. Maybe not corporate ones, but mid-level teams, logistics, warehouse analytics, inventory efficiency. I could help startups streamline their supply chains, run leaner, maybe even remotely. She nodded. You'd be great at that. I looked up at her. You really think so? She didn't hesitate. I know so. That night, I opened my laptop for the first time in weeks. At first, it was slow. I started with a Google document, then a spreadsheet, then a list of potential clients. I reached out to a few people I used to work with, quietly, cautiously, just to feel things out. A former vendor I'd worked with messaged back, enthusiastic and supportive. He said he'd been looking for someone just like me to help revamp his inventory system. We hopped on a Zoom call. I walked him through a few fixes for free. He insisted on paying me. Said I saved him $2,000 in just an hour. That night, I built a logo. Nothing fancy. Just my name, clean font, and a tagline. Clarity. Efficiency. Results. By the end of the month, I had 3 paying clients. I wasn't rich. I wasn't even stable. But I had momentum. And something else happened, too. I started talking to my lawyer again. He was patient, methodical. He walked me through the process, what we needed to prove, what documents to gather, what testimony to prepare. We filed a counter to my parents' ridiculous lawsuit, and he assured me we had a far stronger case. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was going on the offensive. We filed for defamation, malicious interference, and emotional damages. And the best part? We subpoenaed phone records, emails, and financial statements. Every lie they told would have to be defended under oath. Meanwhile, I kept working. Kira helped me design a website. I joined freelancer groups. I started getting referrals. Word spread. I offered results, not fluff. No bloated proposals, no unnecessary jargon. Just clean, efficient systems that saved small businesses money. I became the guy they called when things were messy and margins were tight. I moved out after 4 months. Rented a small apartment near Kira's place. Nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, old carpet, weird stain on the ceiling. But it was mine. I bought a second-hand desk, set up a corner workspace, and taped my logo to the wall above it. Clarity. Efficiency. Results. 6 months after rock bottom, I had 12 clients, a functioning business, and enough cash flow to pay myself a modest salary. But I hadn't forgotten. Not the phone call. Not the laughter in my dad's voice. Not the voicemail from my mom telling me I wasn't welcome at my own brother's wedding. And definitely not the forged documents. My lawyer called me one afternoon while I was working on a logistics blueprint. "Bradley," he said, voice calm. "Their case is unraveling. We got the call recordings." I froze. "Call recordings? Your former employer records incoming calls. Not all of them, but some. They had the original conversation between your father and the HR desk. He introduced himself as a whistleblower and claimed you had confessed to him. But more importantly," he paused, he laughs at the end of the call. "Says, that ought to take him down a peg." My heart thudded. It wasn't just vindication. It was proof. Proof that they'd done this with intent. That they weren't trying to help. That they wanted me to fall. We also got confirmation that the edited bank statements came from a printer in their home, my lawyer added. "One of your former coworkers recognized the formatting. We traced it back. It's enough for a criminal investigation if you want to go that route." I didn't answer right away. I looked around my apartment. The desk. The logo. The schedule I'd built. The stack of client folders on my bookshelf. I had built a life from nothing. And now, I had the power to end the people who tried to erase me. But not yet. No, I wasn't done setting the stage. Because the next step wasn't just legal. It was personal. And I had one final card to play. The day I decided to go through with it, the sky was gray, like the universe itself was holding its breath. I was sitting in my apartment, still modest, still a little cramped, but now filled with the quiet hum of purpose. My laptop buzzed beside me, a fresh contract sitting in my inbox from a new client across the state. It had taken months of slow, painful rebuilding, but I was finally out of the hole they'd dug for me. I had cash in the bank. My reputation was quietly mending. My clients trusted me. More than anything, I had something I hadn't felt in nearly a year, leverage. And that meant it was time. Time to stop surviving and start strategizing. My lawyer, Evan, was the first piece of the puzzle. He was calm and unshakable, a man who never raised his voice even when he was about to ruin someone in court. When I called him and said, "I'm ready to press forward with the defamation suit," he didn't ask questions. He just said, "Then let's start preparing for war." We already had the call recordings, one from my dad to my old HR department, another from my mom to a different manager at the company. The tone in both calls was casual, almost gleeful. It was the kind of evidence you couldn't buy, malicious intent, preserved in crystal-clear audio. But that was just the surface. Evan wanted more. He wanted to hit them with so much pressure that they'd crack from the inside. "Let's see who else they talked to," he said. "Let's follow the timeline." So we filed for discovery. Within weeks, we got access to emails, phone logs, even some text messages between my parents and Jason. What we found chilled me. Jason had known. He wasn't just a passive bystander. He'd encouraged them. One text from my dad to him read, "He's getting cocky. Might be time to humble him." Jason replied, "Do it before the wedding. Don't want him showing up and making things about himself." I sat in my car reading that message over and over, my knuckles wide around the steering wheel. I'd expected resentment, sure. Jealousy, maybe. But the coldness in those words, it felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. And yet, it confirmed something crucial. This wasn't just about pride. This was planned. With that confirmation, Evan filed a formal claim for damages, citing malicious conspiracy and intentional interference with business relations. We named both of my parents and Jason. But the lawsuit was only part of it. I didn't just want legal revenge. I wanted personal revenge. I wanted them to know exactly what they threw away. And I wanted them to watch it grow into something they could never touch again. So I started laying the real groundwork. The first step was visibility. Until now, I'd kept my business quiet, intentionally low profile to avoid attracting attention. But now I wanted everyone to see it. I hired a designer to overhaul my website. Clean, professional, sharp. I paid for branding consultations, updated all my social media profiles, and launched a weekly blog on supply chain innovations that quickly picked up traction in a couple of niche circles. Then, I reached out to a podcast host I'd met years ago at a logistics conference. We'd shared a drink and exchanged business cards, and I still had his number. When I called, he remembered me instantly. Bradley Miller? From the Atlantic Freight Summit? You were the panelist on real-time inventory tracking, right? That's me, I said, smiling. I've been working on some independent projects. Wondered if you'd be open to a guest interview. Absolutely. Name the day. 2 weeks later, the podcast dropped. It was called The Supply Chain Solution, and it had a modest but loyal following. My episode was titled From Collapse to Comeback: How One Consultant Rebuilt After Corporate Fallout. I didn't name names. I didn't air dirty laundry. But I spoke truth. I talked about false allegations, being sabotaged by people I trusted, rebuilding from scratch, and helping others do the same. I framed it as resilience, strategy, leadership under pressure. But those who knew the story, my family, they'd hear every word as a dagger. And it worked. Because a week later, Jason texted me. Jason, did you seriously go on a podcast and talk about us? I stared at it, then typed back a single sentence. Me? Did you seriously try to ruin my life before your wedding? No reply. Good. Let the silence sink in. But I wasn't finished yet. The wedding had come and gone by this point. Jason and Danielle got married in some vineyard upstate. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. One of Danielle's cousins followed me on Instagram and posted a photo dump that included my parents, laughing, arms around Jason, like they hadn't torn their other son's life apart months earlier. In that moment, I realized something strange. They still believed they'd won. That I'd stay broken. That the lawsuit was just noise. That I was still the black sheep, knocking on their door, waiting for a scrap of approval. So I gave them a taste of what they feared most. Indifference. I stopped acknowledging them. No texts. No emails. No engagement with their social media. They reached out once. My mom sent a brittle, passive-aggressive message saying she hoped we could move past all this unpleasantness. I didn't respond. Instead, I posted a LinkedIn update with a smiling photo of me in my new office space. Yes, I'd just leased a small suite downtown to meet with clients. Grateful to have turned the darkest chapter of my life into the launchpad for something I never thought I'd have: freedom. Thanks to everyone who supported me during the rebuild. More to come. It got 19,000 views, including one from my father. Don't ask me how I knew. I just knew. Someone told him. Someone showed him. That's the thing about people like him. They always keep tabs on what they hate. Meanwhile, Evan had set our court date. I wasn't just suing for defamation anymore. We'd added damages from lost wages, reputational harm, emotional trauma, and punitive action for the forged financial documents. My old company, realizing the liability, offered me a quiet settlement. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to acknowledge wrongdoing, and enough to fund the next stage of my business growth. And with that growth came more power. I hired a part-time assistant. I spoke at a logistics summit. I was invited to consult for a mid-sized freight company, who offered me double what I used to make in my old job. And still, I stayed quiet, because I wanted them to wonder what was coming, to feel the weight of not knowing. And then, finally, came the opportunity I'd been waiting for. A friend of mine, Trevor, reached out. He was a partner at a real estate agency, and they were helping a client sell a house. It was large, old, and located in a familiar part of town. He sent me the address. It was my parents' house. They were selling. Downsizing, apparently. Whether it was legal costs, stress, or financial strain, I didn't know. But they were quietly putting it on the market. Trevor added one more thing. They're not listing it publicly yet. Seller's request. But if you're interested, I can get you in early. I stared at the address for a long time. I thought about the front porch where I'd been scolded as a teen. The living room where they laughed at my college plans. The kitchen where I'd once tried to show them my first paycheck, only to be told I was still just a boy. And slowly I smiled. Because now I was the one knocking. The day I walked through the front door of my parents' house again, it was empty. No family photos on the walls. No coats hanging by the entrance. No fake plants on the windowsills. Just dust and echoes and the lingering smell of stale coffee. It had been almost a decade since I'd stood in that living room. but I remembered everything. Every chipped corner of furniture, every creaky floorboard, every place I'd once felt like a visitor in my own home. Trevor met me by the fireplace, clipboard in hand. "It's under market value," he said quietly. "They're desperate to sell fast." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Rumors of mounting debt. Lawsuit pressure. I think your name might have spooked them." I gave a small, dry laugh. "Good." The tour was brief. I didn't need to see the whole place. I already knew the layout better than I knew my own apartment. This wasn't about falling in love with a property. It was about symbolism. It was about walking through the place they used to control me and knowing that this time, I held all the cards. I bought it that week. Cash deal, no contingencies, through an LLC with my assistant as the listed agent. They never knew it was me. Not at first. But we'll get to that. While the paperwork processed, the defamation trial moved forward. It was slower than I liked. Depositions, motions, delays. But with each passing month, the pressure built. Evan was relentless. He dragged out every document, every message, every lie. He had my parents on tape, in print, and on record contradicting themselves. And then came the hearing. We sat across from each other in a small courtroom. My father wore a crumpled suit. My mother clutched her purse like it was a lifeline. Jason was nowhere to be seen. He distanced himself once the subpoenas hit his doorstep. I wondered if he thought ghosting would save him from accountability. It wouldn't. Evan presented our case with brutal clarity. The recordings of their calls to my former employer. The fabricated bank statements traced back to their home printer. The emails and text messages between them and Jason, laced with smugness and spite. My job loss. The mental health toll. The financial collapse that followed. They tried to argue it was a misunderstanding. They tried to paint themselves as concerned parents who'd overreacted. But the evidence shredded their narrative. I didn't speak much. Just once, when the judge asked if I had anything to say. I stood up, looked my parents in the eyes, and said, "You didn't just try to humiliate me. You tried to erase me. And now you want to be pitted for the fallout of your own cruelty. You taught me a lot growing up, mainly what not to become. So thank you. For that, and nothing else." We won. The judgment was brutal. Damages awarded for defamation, loss of income, emotional distress, legal fees, and a public retraction requirement submitted to my former employer. The amount? 6 figures. Not enough to make me rich, but more than enough to ruin them. They appealed. They lost. Within months, their accounts were frozen. Assets seized. The house, which had already been sold, was legally untouchable, tucked safely under my LLC before their creditors could reach it. And that's when I made my move. I waited until the day they were officially forced to vacate the small rental they'd moved into after selling the house. According to court records, they'd fallen behind on payments. The bank was threatening foreclosure. Their car had been repossessed. My dad tried to borrow from Jason, but Jason had his own legal fees to deal with, thanks to his involvement in the conspiracy. My parents were, in every sense of the word, homeless. So I sent them a letter. It was hand-delivered, cream-colored envelope. No return address. Inside, just a simple note typed in the same font they'd used on the fake bank statements they once gave my boss. "You can find shelter at 239 Alderwood Drive. I hear the new owner is very generous." That was their address. The house they raised me in. The one they had to sell. The one I now owned. They showed up the next morning, confused and probably desperate, standing on the porch like characters out of a memory I'd buried. My father banged on the door, while my mother looked around like she couldn't believe she wasn't dreaming. I waited 5 minutes before opening it. The look on their faces when they saw me standing there? Perfect. My father's jaw locked. My mother blinked rapidly. Neither of them spoke first. I stepped aside, just enough for them to see into the entryway, the polished floorboards, the repainted walls, the absence of any trace of them. I leaned against the doorframe. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. "You bought the house?" my mom whispered. "I did." "But why?" my dad snapped, suddenly angry. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" "No game," I said. "You tried to take everything from me. Now I own the walls you used to control me in." "This isn't right," my mom choked out. "We're your parents." "No," I corrected. "You were people who gave me life, and then did everything in your power to ruin it." That title, parents, you lost at the day you picked a vendetta over your own child. I closed the door. They didn't knock again. I watched through the peephole as they stood there for a few minutes, exchanging heated whispers. Then they walked away, shoulders heavy, heads low. I never saw them again. Jason sent me an email about 6 months later, something vague and half apologetic. He said he regretted getting caught up in all the drama and hoped we could move forward. I didn't reply, because some things don't deserve closure. Today, my business is thriving. I have 6 full-time employees, a waiting list of clients, and a quarterly newsletter with thousands of subscribers. I'm mentoring young professionals who remind me of myself before the collapse, hungry, hopeful, and looking for guidance from someone who's walked through fire and come out whole. I still drive past the house sometimes. I rent it out now, to a sweet couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever. They've painted the shutters blue, planted a small garden in the front. The laughter that spills from their windows feels like a cleansing. Sometimes, I park across the street and watch them for a few minutes, just to remind myself that home is no longer a place of bitterness. It's a place of healing, a place I reclaimed, a place I won. And every time I get out of my car and walk away, I do it with my head held high. Not because I destroyed them, but because I didn't let them destroy me. I didn't burn the bridge. They tried to drown me under it, and I learned how to build my own.